Paul here from Meldrum Performance Coaching, number 3 in our seminar series. So this one is how to effectively program for clients of all the main training goals, an effective system of periodization, and how that fits in with the best nutritional periodization practices. So this is a very, very complex topic, but I'm going to attempt to distill down to an hour and a half in the seminar and give some tools for people to be able to work with. Distilling program design over a podcast is impossible. We can only really talk concepts rather than a complete approach to program design. But anyway, we will do what we can. So what we need to figure out with program design is, first of all, is get the screen right so we can figure out what exercises someone can do. What I generally like to do is I like to break program design down into 3 parts. The first thing I like to do is design the microcycle. So the microcycle is the training week. So training week, the first bit of data that I want to work out is how often can that client train? Because that client can only train 2 times a week, running a 4 or 6 times a day, 4 to 6 times a week training cycle is a waste of time. The client won't be able to do it. They won't be too happy, etc., etc. So that's the first thing that we need to work out. With the microcycle from there, I want to work out the training split based on the training frequency, based on the moves that I feel that client needs to work on, muscle groups, or whatever they want to focus on first. So from here, I'll work out then what muscle groups or exercises will fit into those particular criteria. And from there, I want to figure out the repetition range that I want to work with, the volume that I need to do to hit the minimal effective dose of volume landmarks, the maintenance volume for the parts that I just feel like they just need to go on to steady maintenance, and the markers that identify the exercises or movements that I want to have an improvement on. So the ones I'm going to progress from minimal to maximal recoverable volume. From here, the next thing, once I've worked out that, my next process is to design the mesocycle, which is the complete training program. So like the 4, 5, 6 week program. How am I going to progress the client through that program and work out where I'm going to increase volume, where I'm going to increase intensity, where I'm going to increase repetitions, whatever progression metric I want to use, I want to put it into the mesocycle next. And with the mesocycle, what I do is I look at all different progression systems that you have, whether it's a double progression system, single progression, or triple progression, and what variable I'll progress, whether it's intensity or volume or sets or whatever it is, and work out which one's going to have the best approach for that client in terms of first logistics and then being able to get it done, and then secondly results. So once I've done that, I can then go back all the way to the first microcycle, and then I can just fill in the exercise selections for which I think are probably going to be the most useful for that client. This is a really good system because it gives you an ability to change the program over time. So rather than programming every day out in advance, like 12 months in advance, which I've talked about before as not being the best use of time, we're able to then go, okay, cool. These are where a client's feeling it. Feeling the exercise the most, they're getting a high stimulus, low fatigue ratio for that. Stimulus fatigue ratio is good. We can put those exercises in there and we can get some progress on that particular scenario. So this is a really, really useful tool to use to be able to help people get better outcomes with their program design. It builds in some agility and some flexibility, because if you don't have that in your program design system, you're going to really, really struggle. Because people change, people injuries happen, life happens, etc. You need to have some agility and flexibility and be able to work with your clients rather than against your clients with that type of thing. From there, once you've worked out the mesocycle progression, you can then work out what the next mesocycle is going to go towards. Are you going to progress the mesocycle in volume? Are you going to progress it in intensity, etc.? And then you can go through that same process, micro mesocycle in mesocycle within itself progression, then work back onto the training days. So what we're going to go over all how to do that, but just thinking about that right now, what's the microcycle that you're going to use, days per week, intent of training, like what's the goal of this training program, and then what muscle groups do you need to put in what days, how are you going to build that up over the course of a mesocycle, then build your training days in. You'll find that you'll very quickly build a 4, 5 week, 6 week program with a lot more ease rather than building out a training day, another training day, and seeing how they all fit together. It's a much better way to look at it. With nutritional periodization, we're going to look at what type of training programs will fit in best with what type of training approach. And really, It's not a super complicated approach, because what you need to do is look at what the limitations the nutritional program or nutritional periodization puts on the training outcome. So for example, if someone's in a calorie surplus, they're in a mass gaining phase, it's really not going to put any demands on their training. It's not going to make it harder for them to recover. In fact, it's going to make it easier to recover. The only thing you might want to change from your periodization there is your periodization of steps, because you can't periodize and eat, steps or cardiovascular training if they are trying to gain mass, because you may want to drop it down so you don't nibble up those calories. From a progression standpoint, you might find, depending on the goal of the person, that your two best drivers are going to be either volume or intensity. So if you're working with a strength athlete, you might want to look at driving volume. If you're driving intensity, if you're looking at someone who's going to hypertrophy, you might drive volume as your primary progression model rather than intensity, so they can take advantage of those extra calories. Now, if someone's in a mini cut, what you'll find is that training really needs to take a back seat down to that maintenance or minimal effective volume for your clients, because they don't have the recovery capacities. Mini cuts are generally at a higher calorie deficit percentage than a normal cutting phase. You might go instead of 10, 20%, 20, 30, straight off the bat, even 40. And what happens there is the client's recovery abilities gets compromised very, very quickly. So we need to make sure we account for that in our program design. When someone's doing a cut, so that you need to change their programming based on the intensity of their deficit and the biofeedback that you receive. So if someone's got a real huge deficit, a really small deficit, and they're finding they can still train a little bit harder, a little bit more, you could add a touch more volume, but you don't want to progress it too much. It's kind of like a fine line at that point. But when you can identify what phase of someone's in their training, what phase they're in nutrition, and how they marry up, you can basically adjust your program design to avoid problems for the client. That's the most important thing with that. You're avoiding problems from nutritional periodization, i.e. eating into recovery demands, etc., versus trying to expedite that progress. Of course, a lot of people will think, cool, if I've got someone on a volume phase, which is more demand, I'm going to put them on the cutting phase 2 or mini cut, they'll get more fat loss. No, they won't. They'll just get more taxed. So we'll be talking about that in our programming systems lecture. So that's one I'm really excited to talk about. I'll go for about 90 minutes, maybe more, depends how much I yak on about, but be very exciting to do. So thanks heaps for listening, guys. Speak soon for biomechanics.